Great Wednesday. Welcome to the Fully Human Connections podcast. I'm your host, King, and I'm joined by my co-host, Reggie. How you doing today, Reggie?
I'm doing well, King. Trying to get the back of my chair set here. uh, once I get that set, so I don't slide off into the screen, I'll be good. There we go. I got it. Good. Whew. Yeah, I'm good.
Do I see a stocking and two snowmen behind you on your
There you go. The little snow people. My mother crocheted those
Oh, really? Oh,
30 or 40 years ago. And the stocking, I forget where the stocking's from exactly, but yeah, that's my in-office Christmas decorations.
okay. All right. So, but that's beautiful. You still have those from your mother. That's definitely a blessing for you, and I know it's beautiful work that she's done there. So, my question for folks like yourself is there a certain date that's acceptable to put out Christmas decorations? Like
Um,
before this date and then after this date is perfectly fine, or does it matter?
well, for corporate America, I think it's somewhere just before Halloween, but that's not the one that I would choose. I typically have not done Christmas decorations until, generally, I don't have a specific date, but 2 or 3 weeks before Christmas, I might begin putting some things up. I don't do a lot of decoration anymore. I mean, these things are in a plastic bag during the year, and I took them out this past weekend. Um, but I would say 2 or 3 weeks, but that's, a lot of people have their stuff up on Thanksgiving weekend.
Yeah, I've been told by people that's the thing that's interesting to me is how the answer differs. Like some people say the day after Thanksgiving is you completely free to put Christmas gifts up without ridicule or criticism, But it's just interesting what some people think. Some people even say, well, December 1st is the starting date that you can put Christmas gifts up. But that's a great segue into as we look at Christmas and gifts, and people have gratitude about getting receiving gifts. So, what's your spiritual energy number today?
So I'm at 10. I'm both there. I had a good morning, and I'm choosing it as well. We've been speaking the last couple of weeks about how we've missed some of these podcasts because of various things going on in our respective lives. Part of mine was just, a minor health thing that kept me coughing for 6 weeks. And I mostly have my voice back now. So it's easier for me to choose a 10 when I feel better physically,
Hmm.
even though my spiritual energy is not reliant on physical energy.
Absolutely. Well, I join you being a 10, and like you, there's challenges. That's the thing about, that's when you know you're alive, is when you're facing challenges. Some people say problems. It all depends on your perspective.
Hmm.
I'm not saying that whatever someone's going through is not a challenge or problem. It's not for me to make a determination. I'll get it as myself, and I would make the determination to say it's more of a challenge for me, no matter what it is. Because at the end of the day, you have to get through it, no matter what it is, and you're going to be different as a result, depending on how, or what degree, how large it is, and how many people in your inner circle it impacts. And it's going to change you in one way or another. So you either look forward to that change, or you can kind of fight that change.
Hmm.
The way the change is inevitable. But I'm a 10. That's what I'm asking for. Saying I'm a 10. And I'll go right into my gratitude moment. I'm grateful to have this kind of mindset, continue to read information and books that put me in this mindset. I've shared with you before, and I get into my list a little more, but really working with these AI tools and just really impressed with what they can do is just incredible. And that's dangerous as well. You
Yeah.
tell folks that to me, Terminator, the movie, the whole Terminator series is a future rendition of where we're going, where the machines just take over the world. They get too smart to get turned off. I just read an article where it said, I think it was something on Chat GBT where that happened, where there was a fail-safe feature, and the AI was smart enough to turn that fail-safe feature off. But they was able to find it quickly that he did that, and so I say that's the future. But in any event, I'm grateful just to be able to experience this now. Um, where I was going with that is, I compiled a list of all the books that I felt that was most influential in my life
Hmm.
that I look at, and I came up with a list of at least for right now. I'm sure it expands, but right now it's 35 different books. And
Uh,
those books, I was able to extrapolate principles from each of those books that I felt that was most applicable to me and what I would have got from it, and compile that into a list that I put into AI to say, this is how I want to actually, look at my life. And it was just really powerful to be able to do that very quickly.
hmm.
That's the power of how to use AI. And I'm grateful to have that mindset, because what I didn't even realize, and AI was really helping me see, was that there was a commonality, even though some of the books from Malcolm X's autobiography to Robert Keegan's Immunity to Change, they ranged in that as far as diversity and author and topic, but they always was about transformation. That's one thing they were consistent across the theme, no matter what book it was. So just really interesting to kind of have that tool to be able to see that. So grateful there, grateful for my mother still alive, going through challenges with that, but I'm grateful that she's still here and has that love energy. As usual, I'm grateful for my life, my health, my ability to see her, walk, talk, stand, breathe, and have sound mind. Those 24 hours to be here with you, be present. That technology that is working today that didn't work last week, and just those blessings. And then finally, as you always like to say, roof over my head, food to eat, and just as I've gotten older and wiser, just the people who I consider to be friends, I'm grateful for those relationships and those energy, those frequency of energies that we all vibrate now.
Yeah, yeah, beautiful. So I have my standard gratitude, and when I say standard, it doesn't minimize it. It's just really several of the grounding things for me is that my basic needs are met. I have indoor plumbing, food in the refrigerator, electricity, heat in the winter, um, a fan or an air conditioner in the summer if I need it less and less in the summers. But I'm just grateful for all of that. And this past week, especially, a couple of things. In fact, tomorrow, in terms of friendships, there's a guy who's it's either 53 or 54 years old, who is like my little brother in many ways. He worked for me when I was working at a college back in the um, late 80s and early 90s, and we've stayed good friends. He was orphaned when he was 15. He lost his parents at 10 and 15 to cancer, and then he went on and he had built his own family. Has 3 beautiful daughters, wonderful daughters. I said they are beautiful, but they're wonderful. And then he's a cancer survivor himself, so we don't get together that much anymore. But we'll spend half a day together tomorrow. So that's one in terms of people. And then last Saturday, over a week ago now, Lou Carnesecca, who was the coach at St. John's University, basketball coach for several decades back in the 70s, actually beginning in the late 60s and through the late 80s, early 90s. He passed away at the age of 99. And I spoke to him a couple of times in my life. I didn't know him well, but my basketball coach and teacher, Jerry Houston, played when Carnesecca was an assistant coach at St. John. So I had a good talk with Jerry this week, and he's one of my close friends and, mentors in many ways still. So I'm just grateful to have, kind of like the guys that I'm helping along who are younger than me and the guys that help me along who are older than me, to have still have access to them in my life as well. And there's many more, but those two have been present the last week or so.
Thanks. That's what's important. As you know, the more I study and learn myself about psychopaths and sociopaths, what's lacking in their lives is those kind of thoughts and discussions of being able to have the emotion to pinpoint people in their lives who are important, why they're important, and have the ability to be graceful about those relationships. And that's what's typically lacking from those two type of personality traits. So. But as any event, I'm grateful to be here and grateful for this discussion. So, with that being said, why don't you take them to our discussion?
Yeah, so it's going to be maybe a little bit longer than usual intro because what I thought we were going to talk about, we're still going to, but we're going to use a very recent event to get into it. So I want to lay the groundwork and then we can jump in. As always, these conversations are grounded in my 2022 book, Healing America's Narratives, the feminine, the masculine, and our collective national shadow, which you and I have been talking about going on 3 years now. And what we were going to begin to talk about today was this larger picture of what we call modernity. And people use modernity in different ways. Some people say it started with the European Enlightenment. Some say that it began with the Industrial Revolution. But basically, it's the series of perspectives, ways of thinking, and behaviors that gave us the world that you and I were born into, with automobiles, structures, houses, modern medicine. And since you and I have been alive, those things have grown and deepened. And we now have obviously computers and digital technology, and now moving into the artificial intelligence realm. So that's what we mean by modernity. And there's both a dignity to it, and there's a disaster to it. That's true with every era or epoch of human, of not even human, but of global existence. And so I want to look at both the dignities and disasters of modernity. One of the several of the truths about modernity, I'll just kind of lay them out, and keeping in mind that the United States has been a leader in growing what we refer to as modernity, especially since the end of World War II. So in many ways, industrially, in other ways, it was a leader since the Industrial Revolution, but especially since World War II when we became, a primary superpower. So a few of the things that characterize modernity. One is exponential population growth, both in this country and around the world. Around the time of the Industrial Revolution, there were about 500 million people on the planet, about 500 million people on the planet. That's just over 200 years ago, say 250. Since then, the population has grown 16-fold. All right, so 16 times 500 million is 8 billion. So it took the planet 4.6 billion years to come up with 500,000 human beings. And in the next 200 plus years, we got to 8 billion. So that's a real accelerated change. That's one. Tied in with that population growth is now, especially post-World War II, a global marketplace where we rely on each other for things that we take for granted, I should say. So if you have a cell phone, if you drive a car, if you use a computer, if you use the internet, even if you buy food, right? It's not all coming from 30 miles from where you live or 300 miles from where you live. It's coming from around the planet. And we rely on this global marketplace, which does trillions of dollars of business a day. And nobody's in control of it. And we need it. It's fossil fuel driven. And the fossil fuel industry is not even the biggest industry on the planet, but it's one of the top 15 or so for sure. And the United States is a big producer of fossil fuels and user of fossil fuels. And then we have in this country unequal protection of the laws in modernity. Certain people have better access to laws and lawyers and can get away with more than others. And we value different lives in different ways. So that's a real short introduction to this idea of modernity in the United States. I mean, modernity is around the planet, but we're talking about this country. So that's the backdrop. And on December 4th, as most listeners will know, the CEO of United Healthcare, which is the health insurance arm of a larger corporation called United Health Group. So the CEO of this one arm of United Health Group, a man named Brian Thompson, who is 51 years old, was in New York City, in Manhattan, for a convention or conference. And as he was walking towards his hotel, or towards the hotel where the conference was going to be, he was shot and killed. Pretty much an execution style. The guy was waiting for him, shot him, and killed him. And it took about a week for authorities to find the killer. The guy got away early morning in New York City, and he was found 2 days ago. Today is December 11th. So he was cited on the 9th in a McDonald's in Pennsylvania, Altoona, Pennsylvania. And it ends up, his name is Luigi Mangione, and he's the alleged killer. He was an Ivy League educated. He went to the University of Pennsylvania, was involved in the tech industry. He was 26 years old. Grew up in a wealthy family in a wealthy area in the Baltimore area, where you are. Had some back pain at some point in his life. But anyway, he basically was upset with the way healthcare worked in this country. And we don't know all the details yet, but he took it upon himself to make a symbolic statement by murdering the CEO of United Healthcare, who is a husband and a father of two. Now, anybody that listens to you and me talk knows that we are not in favor of killing people with guns or any other weapon. And we've spoken about the discrepancies and the problems with for-profit, what I call the for-profit insurance, pharmaceutical, medical, government, finance, lobbying complex in this country, which we call healthcare, which, in 2024, there's still about 27 million Americans who don't have access to the healthcare system, despite the 2010 Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act that President Obama passed, along with some members of Congress. So all that to say, Luigi Mangione, a 26-year-old Ivy-educated, very smart and very promising human being, according to all his friends that have come forward when they found out that he was arrested for this crime, killed Brian Thompson, 51-year-old father of two and CEO of United Healthcare. I would argue at the intersection of three elements of the collective shadow of the United States, or three examples or manifestations of the collective shadow. One, we live in a nation that has normalized daily gun violence. It's just how we live now. We have active shooter drills. We kill kids in schools. We kill people at concerts and movie theaters, on the street in general. And a lot of us are so overwhelmed with the way the country and the world are that we just kill ourselves. About 2/3 of the 130 gun deaths a day are suicides. So that's one, normalized gun violence. Two, major dissatisfaction, especially for middle and lower income people, with the healthcare system that's controlled by insurance companies and pharmaceutical companies, not controlled by individual doctors and nurses. And three, the unequal protection of the laws for the average American compared to wealthy Americans or celebrity Americans or government affiliated Americans. So at the intersection of those three problems, a young man who by all other measures seemed to have a promising life in front of him And this is not making excuses for murder. We're not talking about causation here. We're speaking about influence. And I'll say more about him, how old he was, and when he was born, which plays in. This murder got much more attention than if had been you, God forbid, or me entering that hotel at 6 o'clock in the morning, give or take, on December 4th. Because who was killed, the manhunt was expansive. It was a nationwide story. If it had been a primary grade, an award-winning primary grade teacher in the New York City public schools, or one of the waiters or receptionists or chefs at the Hilton Midtown, which I believe is the hotel involved, I do not believe that the manhunt and the media coverage would have been as extensive and as large as it was. So there are major sociological, psychological issues at play here, and the horrible, unfortunate murder by an otherwise apparently promising 26-year-old of a father of two and a husband and a very, very well-paid healthcare CEO didn't happen in a vacuum. And all of that is part of the disaster of modernity as it manifests in the United States. So I know that was a mouthful. I apologize for that, but I think it's really important because it's a specific moment that really shows us one aspect of how these different forces interact. So I'll shut up and see what you want to do with that.
Well, I can tell you, I've never heard the term modernity in that context. So, as usual, you continue to enlighten me. That's why I look forward to the show to learn and grow. I looked at it, the first thing I thought that came to my mind when I heard about the incident, the shooting, before the suspect was captured, was, it reminded me of Malcolm X's quote from Kennedy, President Kennedy had got assassinated. Chickens come home to roost, right? Yeah. And that's what we see as America, is that we live in a violent country. That's in everything that we, that's part of our culture, is violence. It's particularly gun violence, as we even step further. The fascination with guns. I mean, you can't watch TV. If there's any drama at all on TV or the movies or whatever platform you tend to look at it, if there's has violence, is going to be gun violence in there. So it's like you accept that that's just normal. Video games, guns. You're shooting something, you're killing something. So it's just baked into our culture, our DNA, and even how we think. What's more prevalent now, I believe, is that people have gotten to the point where they see that violence is a solution to solving their problems. So again, as you're saying, the opportunity's always been there, but lately it's not only the opportunity there, but this is how you deal with it. That's what most people are really beginning to believe when they've been wrong. And I'm not saying that I agree with his actions, but I agree with that. I shouldn't say I agree, but I definitely understand the environment of which bred those actions, and that we see manifest before us. And what was interesting is also the fallout, the media coverage, as you say. Again, that goes back to our capitalistic system. We live in a culture, a world where, like I was telling someone else last month, I was just amazed at how Halloween is a season now. When I was a kid, Halloween was one day. It was October 31st, at the most a weekend. It was, the weekend, you talk about the weekend, but that's all it was. You just go by, you dress costumes and candy, and that was it. Now it's like adults cherish Halloween more than it's bigger than it's ever been before. And like I said, it's a season. It's, right after Labor Day is Halloween, and you stay in Halloween season until the actual 31st, of October. Again, that's a capitalistic system. And then what's fascinating about Halloween is the violence. I mean, you watch horror movies, so again, that violence is amplified. The violence is there. People want it. People thirst for that kind of violence. Uh, Another thing that came to mind as well was, and again, this comes from my mother. It's funny how you can see if you spend time with your loved ones, particularly your parents, you see the traits you get, you inherit, whether you want to or not. My mother loves watching true crime series. Now that's the rage now. Netflix and HBO, they're showing these true crime stories. And I didn't like them at first, but I watched a couple and now I'm actually intrigued by it, human behavior. But didn't look too much because it's like it's showing such horrific stories. These people are sharing their horrific story, and it's like I don't know how they get there and talk about it so matter of factly. Like, yeah, my child was brutally murdered, and and they're just talking about it. You can see it's a little emotion, but it's not as much emotion that I would have. I don't care if it's 25 years later, I would be able to talk about that. But where I'm going with all of that is, and watching this one show, this woman talked about her husband had a fascination with watching James Bond and 007. He went out and brought a gun, the Beretta, that James Bond has, and he would play with that Beretta and just like he adored it, And that's because again, that's the culture we live in. So he eventually ended up killing his kids with that said Beretta later on, which is where that story was going. But my point is, everything you laid out in the discussion is no one's shocked by violence. We was really it's not even shocking anymore it how we respond to it. Because as you said, if that would have been someone who didn't have the financial wherewithal, then the police definitely wouldn't have gotten involved and it definitely wouldn't have been solved as quickly as it is. Living here in Baltimore, I see murders every day. Or actually say I read about murders every single day. I hear about murders every day that go unsolved. Of course, maybe the reasons why they do. Witnesses don't come forth and all that. But still, there's no massive effort put forth. Whereas this gentleman, we got to make sure we nip this in the bud. We got to catch him quickly, and how he gets handled even by the prosecution is going to be interesting because it's going to set a precedence either way. I think more people are going to be encouraged because I saw folks who I was considered left politically making statements such as, don't say anything, don't be a witness in this particular case. There's actually a sign that someone created, if you said the shooter is from the Baltimore area. So on one of the highways, 83, someone wrote on the banner and hung it over the highway, deny, delay, and dispute. Or I believe that's referring to how we should handle, being a witness or, like everyone should just, comfort him and take him in. He did an act for the greater good. That's how they're looking at it. So it's just really interesting to see how when I just want to end my saying with this quote. I'm going to paraphrase it. It's not the exact quote, but it was something to the fact of we hope to gain or we hope to grow and benefit much like our oppressors, but we don't want to become like them. We just want the resources they have. So I just really butchered it, but that's where it's going with this. If you're hoping for his death, then how are you really better than the person who the CEO is? We have to look at at what point are we going to hold ourselves to a higher standard? And some people just giving up on it. They like throw out the higher standard conversation. We're going to be just as dirty as the others. And that to me is the direction I don't want to go in. Because that's a slope that once you get into that negative energy, you're there. It consumes you. That's the thing. You can't play with that. You can't. It's like smoking crack. You can't just smoke crack when you feel like it and let it just be there. It's gonna once you bring that energy into your life, that thinking, that acceptance of murder for this particular reason, into your logic, into your thought process, it's there. And once it's there, that's when it becomes dangerous.
Yeah, I agree. So I want to begin to unpack this a little bit more detail. Um, Three things are coming to mind. One is I appreciate your pointing to the word modernity. So just a real quick history on that. And not everybody would agree with this language, but it's enough people agree that it's fairly common. It's used in academic circles. So um, prior to, let's say, the 14 and 1500s, the church, this is a European-based perspective, the church dominated Europe. The Pope was the boss. There were kings and queens and stuff, but the Pope, the church made the rules. The earth is the center of the universe. God did this, God did that. Jesus, did this, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And that epoch, that time period is called traditionalism because it was all based in myth. It wasn't based, you couldn't prove any of it. All right. And then the 14 and 1500s, people like Copernicus and Galileo and others, as they had access to telescopes and science and math began to emerge in certain ways, they could prove that, in fact, the earth wasn't the center of anything and that the sun wasn't. So that was the beginning of modernity, which is kind of a science-based and evidence-based way of looking at the world. And it said, sorry, Pope, but you got it wrong, man. So that began to weaken some of the beliefs of traditionalism, the myths of traditionalism. And then there's a post-modernity, which really began in the early to mid 20th century, which challenged modernity because they basically said to modernity, well, look, you have all of this success and wealth and you can achieve great things and build all these things, but it's all based on colonialism and it's all based on rich white guys. So the post-modern world, post-modernity began to critique modernity. But that, I don't want to go any further than that, but that's kind of, just take those three for now, from traditionalism of the church and myth to modernity, science and achievement and industry, technology in the largest meaning of the word, and then post-modernity, which said, yeah, that's a rich white guys club. And so, but modernity to this day is the most powerful force on the country, on the planet. It's industry, it's wealth, it's all of that. It's the most and most governments, even if whether they're communist or capitalist, they use the tools of modernity to get their way: weapons, wealth, etc. So that's what that's how we're holding modernity. So that's one. Back to Luigi, and this is, for me, this is a very sad story and it's tragic. So he was born around 1998. He's 26 years old, so give or take, would that be 98? I think so. Yeah, 24. Yeah. So back in the early 80s, a man by the name of John Walsh, he and his wife's young son was killed. And over a period of time, Walsh became an activist, and he's the guy that's founded and starred in America's Most Wanted, that show that ended up helping law enforcement capture some bad people over a period of years. I think the show began airing in 1988. Don't quote me on those dates. Now, we've all heard of baby boomers and Generation X and Generation Y and Generation Z. Generation Z is often called the internet generation, or the I-gen, internet generation. And most sociologists put the beginning birth year for the I-gen, or Generation Z, at around 1995. So that's when that generation began. And that generation is the first generation of children to is the only generation to come of age. They were in middle school, give or take, when these things emerged, along with Facebook and Twitter and Instagram and everything else. So they were kind of tweeners, early adolescents, born in 95. So they were 12 in 2007, give or take 2008. And many of their parents were impacted by America's Most Wanted and this fear of something horrible happening to my children. Now, I'm painting in broad brush strokes here because not every parent in this country responded in that way. But that generation was really strongly informed by helicopter parents, that the kids didn't go out and play anymore in the public park by themselves or ride their bikes around town or anything. They were given this structured helicoptering parenting where they didn't have any real freedom. They had little responsibility, and they were never really exposed to challenges. So when they got to college, they didn't know how to deal with people who were different from them or who disagreed with them, or even ideas in the classroom that they didn't agree with. So they needed safety. They needed protection from the world, basically, because they didn't grow up with any interaction with it. Luigi Mangione is part of that generation. And he had the additional, I would say, handicaps of privilege and wealth, because he had even more protections. So, and again, I'm not saying this explains what he did, but he was definitely part of a sociological reality by being born in 1998, which limited his ability to navigate difference and difficulty. In a country where gun violence is normalized, in a country where and he was found with a ghost gun, where he bought some parts and manufactured some parts with a 3D printer. So it was this perfect storm of events that allowed this to happen. And one of the things he had posted on Goodreads was a quote that I have on my Substack today. And I had the quote on my Substack before I knew anything about Luigi Mangione. But it was a quote from Krishnamurti that says, "It is no measure of health to be well adjusted to a profoundly sick society." Mangione had that as one of his favorite quotes. So in terms of his critique of healthcare, he and I probably agreed on everything, as far as I can tell, with the limited amount that have been published about him so far. So what I'm saying is, what's the difference between me and you and Luigi? I mean, you're familiar with the geography down there. You and I probably agree for the most part on the for-profit healthcare issue. We've never really discussed it in depth, but I think we have some agreement there. You're not going to go out and kill an executive of some industry you disagree with. Neither am I. Neither you nor I went to an Ivy League education. Although looking back, I think if we applied, we probably could have gotten in. Take that. So there are so many factors that go into what we're looking at here, and they're playing out in a profoundly sick society. Anybody in America who thinks this is a healthy society right now, let's have a conversation. I mean, it works really well for certain segments of the society who financially are okay, and it doesn't work at all for others. And if it's not working reasonably well for everyone, it's not a healthy society. So I'll just stop there. And I want to bring in that whole, it would have been harder to explain him if he were 63 years old or 55 years old. But he wasn't taught how to cope growing up. There's a good chance, I should say, that coping under difficult circumstances wasn't something that he had to deal with a lot because of how he grew up and when he grew up in this country. And again, I'm extrapolating. I can't say it's definitely true for that one individual, but the sociology is really clear on that generation. And he's in that generation. So I'll stop there.
Yeah, That's interesting. And as you said, that the data might point to that as being the case. But what's interesting is also the movie came out in the '90s, I believe, early 2000s, called John Q,
Hmm.
which Denzel played just a regular blue collar worker who was in a hospital and didn't get the Medicare or his daughter, I believe, daughter or wife or son, someone very close to him,
Right.
wasn't being treated fairly by the hospital because of his economic status. Insurance cut him off, and that triggered him to take over the hospital, demand what he felt was justice in an unjust world. And when you said you and I wouldn't do it, the first thing I thought about was the triggers. You know, it's like in a normal mind, we would. But if you put in a situation, I'm not sure that I'm saying he was,
Right.
but you put in a situation where you just see clearly injustice being done to you, and you are in that space of you believe it's done to you personally. Like someone personally is saying, just you, Reggie, or know, or are going to be denied this benefit. I know it's everyone else may get it, but you're not getting it. And here's why. And so that decision is now impacting a loved one or you directly as far as receiving health care as a result. Could that trigger it at that point? And see, that's where I think it's like this violent tendency, and once since we're so steeped in it, it's like it's there and it's dormant, that the urge, that trigger. But what's going to trigger that to make you say that's enough? I've reached my sanity breaking point. I can care less about the consequences. I'm not looking to, have a decent life after this. For me, the most dominating thought in my mind right now is getting justice. And whatever comes as a result of that decision comes with it. I'm willing to accept that. Once you reach that critical decision, that trigger in your mind, and that's the thing where I think that we're going to see more cases of this coming along.
Hmm.
Maybe it won't be, to be honest, I'm kind of surprised that we don't see as much, I should say, folks like Supreme Court justices, judges, um, other high profile figures able to just really walk the streets and everybody know they're doing dirt. Like the CEO, I'm sure a lot of folks can sit here and that's what they're doing, pointing to the fact is, okay, this gentleman shot him once and he's going to be prosecuted and to the fullest extent of the law. But how many deaths that occurred under the CEO's watch, or because of his decision to deny healthcare benefits to maybe millions of different people in need of that?
Yeah.
So maybe that's universal karma coming into play, right? So that's an interesting perspective. I think that's what a lot of people are. They're how you see this, to me, comes back to your identity. So if you identify as, again, based on your race, based on your religion, based on your career, that's where your identity, majority of your identity thoughts are rooted, then it's easier to me to play the victim role and go down that slippery slope of taking it personal and I've been slighted and this is what has to happen as a result of it. I can't stand, as Papa would say, I stood as I was it, I've taken all I can stand, I can't stand no more, right? And
I had a spinach omelet this morning. Thank you.
and so when you have that, when you reach that crescendo, so to speak,
Yeah.
I think any of us can be brought to that. It's just a matter of what's the trigger. What triggers that action from you where, again, consequences is thrown away. You're no longer in the rational mind of, I want to work tomorrow, I want to have this for my family. I'm done. And this is what I'm going to do. And like I said, for me, it's going to be interesting to see how many other people are going to repeat this action. And then seeing how we're going to respond as a nation to how we prosecute? Is his privilege going to kick into his sentencing? You know, are people going to be willing to be lenient on him, or because of the fact is he's done something a lot of us want to do and maybe won't take action on? Like you took out one of the CEOs of a healthcare company, or as you say, an arm of a particular healthcare company. You know, so you stood up for justice, so you're a hero. They're gonna he becomes a martyr in their eyes. You know, so it's really going to be interesting to see how this really plays out, because one way or another, I think that we're going to be the winds are blowing in this direction, and how we stay in this space is going to be this energy. It's going to be really interesting for me going forward.
Yeah, I mean, the way I would summarize all of this is it's a real mess. I mean, there's some really frightening things going on now. And I agree with you. In fact, Shari and I had a conversation yesterday, and I'm getting older and I don't have a firearm. But I asked him, do you think you could kill? And I know I can. If given that I was physically capable of killing somebody, but it would have to be in the immediate defense of my own life or the life of someone I love. That I know I could do that. I know I have enough pent up rage over 70 years where I could do that. It's a different thing from planning an execution because you think something is unjust. It's a different way. So going back to what you said, I agree 100%. Identity. And for me, identity includes developmental perspective and a lot of other things. So I agree with that 100%, because, we've already seen that, take all of it, the for-profit healthcare industry, the for-profit gun industry, the for-purchase federal government industry, Elon Musk spent $250 million to help Trump get elected this time. The NRA, I forget how much they contributed. Those industries aren't going to suddenly change. Best case, well, I don't know if it's best case, but what United Healthcare is going to do is they're going to make sure all of their primary executives now have bodyguards, and that's going to jack up the cost of insurance premiums. That's what they're going to do. They're not going to say, oh, they're right. We've been hurting clients and patients for decades now, trying to take care of our shareholders and our capitalization. And United Health Group is the 11th largest company on the planet. United Health Group, not United Healthcare, it's the 11th largest on the planet. According to what I heard in a congressional hearing when I went back and listened yesterday, where the United Health Group CEO, the guy that's in charge of the whole thing, in other words, Brian Thompson's boss, that is the 11th largest company on the planet. It's huge. And it controls everything from pharmacies to doctors to insurance. It controls, like it's a vertical monopoly. They're not going to change. And because they also lobby, Congress isn't going to change them. So, that's the real scary piece there. This idea, nothing happened when 20 first graders were slaughtered 20 miles from where I'm sitting right now at Sandy Hook in 2012. So, one executive, well, okay, we'll promote somebody. 20 first graders, it's not, we don't value life that way. And it's a real, for me, a disintegration or a manifestation of the lack of integration that this society has grown on and has been built on. And Martin Luther King Jr. said, this is definitely a paraphrase, that he goes, the next major revolution or rebellion isn't going to be black versus white. It's going to be rich versus poor, or more specifically, poor versus rich. And he died in 1968, so he said that somewhere in the mid 60s. And the thing is now, it's how do you do the rebellion? Because people for whom the system kind of works okay don't want to risk what they have. People for whom the system is, who are running the system, don't want to change it. So there's a small number of people, in the millions, but still a small number of people, who are really hurt by the system and disenfranchised by it. How do they actually rebel? What do they actually do to make a difference? And that's the frustration. Going back to what you said, what is it that brings me to my the point at which I go crazy, where I do a really crazy thing? And we all have different breaking points. And I want to make a quick comment on John Q and Denzel, because he kind of went and did the 3 Equalizer movies, so he kind of took John Q. I think Denzel has some. I mean, he grew up in the city. He went to Fordham University. I say the city, New York. So he's a New Yorker, and I love him as an actor. But he went from John Q to the 3 Equalizer movies, and I said, I hope he's okay. Because there's a certain, it's not the same theme. It's kind of, he becomes, effectively, he was a government assassin who was just trying to retire, and kept on bumping into bad guys. So, yeah, but it's, yeah. Imagine a culture where you have, this is just coming to me now, and I don't know what the answer to this is, but imagine a culture where you have this systemic inequity, these large corporations and government running things that don't take care of the most needy people, but you don't have the violence. In other words, you don't have the gun issue. We don't kill 130 people a day. What do you do that? What would that be like then? How would you manifest your rage, etc.? How would that look without the violent move? Like, as Americans, we can't imagine that. And again, in fairness, it's not just gun violence, but we're speaking specifically about that today. A quick note: I looked up the New York City police CompStat report. The statistics it's a weekly statistical thing that each precinct commander has to send into the commissioner's office or wherever. I don't know how it works exactly. But in the week of December 4th, from December 2nd to December 8th, that week in New York City, there were 5 murders. I challenge anybody to give me any information about the other 4. The CEO murder got all the attention. I mean, so there it is right there. In fact, I think there were 300 something murders in New York City to date for this year. Unless you knew one of the victims, name another one you can think of.
Right.
And then in the previous, I looked at the numbers are still in my mind. In the previous month, including December 4th, I think there were like 28 murders. Name one. Can't do it. So that's the whole media perceptive thing. We have to get this guy because it makes the city look bad if an important person gets killed, but not if, like I use the example again, if a waitress from the hotel or a local teacher was walking by, it's not going to have the same impact. And that's a real scary comment on the American culture and the idea of equal protection and life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness, because it's not equal. It's not close to equal.
It's not. It's so much so that, in the video game world, the waitress you're talking about, or this anyone who's not the rich white CEO, of a company, it would be considered NPC, and NPC stands for non-playing character. So they're just other characters in a video game, and you don't care about them dying. You know, you drive your car into them, you shoot them indiscriminately. You don't care. You don't know them. There's no story. There's no connection. And in the movies, you know, I watch a movie now. I use the term. I didn't make this term up. I've heard it obviously before, but that's what comes to mind now. Cannon fodder.
Yeah.
Movie, I'm identifying the fodder characters. Okay, that character is just fodder. In other words, they're there to be killed so we can see the violence and the criminality of the killer. That's why this character exists in this movie. They're not for us to get established or be connected to. They're just there to be killed. And that's how society treats normal everyday people. We're just fodder. You know, the CEOs and this system that we live in, they're the ones that matter. Their lives matter. That's what needs to be protected. And that's what we're going to see protected from the context of if there is harm done to those individuals, then you're going to see the full weight of the justice system come at you. The full weight of the criminal, the police, you know, Eric Adams, right now, this is your priority as a mayor. You get this done. You know, you're going to be talking to the governor. You're going to be talking to everyone else until we figure out what's going on, and we're going to get this solved. So that's just my last comment. Is that it's like, and most people see and accept that. That's the problem. It's like, to your point, when you talked about before about people coming together and saying, well, we come together wasn't our best interest because as the majority of us are not rich. We're the 99%. So why can't we just simply just come together and easily defeat the 1%, spread the wealth out equally, and everybody has a better life? And that's when you bring race into it. You bring all these other things, divide the 99%, say, well, you're in this tribe and you're in this tribe based on your race, you're in this tribe based on your gender, you're in this tribe based on your age, you're in this tribe based on your religious beliefs. So now you're divided. If you don't have time to focus on what the 1% is doing to you, you just have to focus on the fact that that's your real enemy right there. You need to deal with him. Don't worry about me. And that's how most of us are acting in this system that we live in. So that's my final thoughts on that. That we reach the top of the hour. But again, we don't always want to always just bring doom and gloom, like other shows where we're just talking about the news with just an unbiased perspective. My goal is to talk about how we can take in this information that we're seeing, process it, and still continue to be on a journey to being more fully human. So with that being said, what do you see as some actionable steps that we can deal with this?
Yeah, so something is really straightforward, but not necessarily easy to do is most of the, I just scanned some of the social media comments and even comments on like New York Times, Washington Post, and you can, Washington Post is horrible. I mean, the Times can be challenging at times, but the people that make the comments on the Washington Post, it's like reading Twitter, X, whatever. But more to the point, most of the the people who would make the jokes about, sorry, my empathy is a pre-existing condition, so I can't provide empathy for this murder. Those kind of comments, minimizing the murder of this husband and father of two. Do your best. I try to do my best to lose my binary way of seeing the world and to learn to seek and take multiple perspectives. In other words, beyond just two perspectives. And one of the skills necessary for that is to be able to take and hold paradox. A paradox is an obvious contradiction where both these two things are both true, but they can't be both true because they contradict each other. So here's an example from what we've been talking about. What the healthcare industry does in the name of profit to clients and patients in any ethical or moral standard is wrong. It's a bad system. It hurts people. For Luigi Mangione to stand in ambush with a gun, with the intention of killing an executive who's also a father and a husband. And whether he had kids or not is not important. I'm just giving the facts. That's also wrong. Both of those are true. So how can I begin to think about this and feel about it, saying murdering this guy was wrong and what that industry and that company does is wrong? What does my brain do with that kind of information? So that's a practice, because there's virtually nothing that's that simple. Oh yeah, I can laugh when a guy gets shot. Or my health insurance is fine. I have a really, I'm a member of Congress because I gave myself a really good health insurance program. I'm not worried about what happens to Reggie Mara, who's on Medicare. I don't care about that. That's his problem. So get out of the binary and begin to look at, look for multiple perspectives and learn to hold paradox. That doesn't resolve the issues, but it helps you, it helps me, helps one not be an asshole in conversations.
Absolutely. Well, again, Reggie, we reached the end of our show. Thank you again for choosing a timely, important topic. We've shifted to the last segment of our show, which is now we want to highlight someone who we believe is either current or in the past has exhibited fully human characteristics and behaviors that we can say this is not just some artificial ideal that we have, but there's people who actually live these behaviors, these lifestyles, despite what was happening to them in their world or is happening to them in their world. I'm going to go first. The person I have in mind, I believe, is someone I know I have not recognized before that I definitely want to recognize. I saw some videos of him recently and made me think about him. And I have started getting a little listen to his music. And again, that just got me into really appreciating and admiring this gentleman. I want to highlight him now as my fully human choice for today, and that's Prince. And, musical genius, he defied the industry norms with his creativity and his individuality. And the thing about him as a multi-instrumentalist and innovator, he broke barriers in music and advocated for artists' rights. I remember him constantly telling other artists, that they have to control their masters. So not only was he a genius as a multi-instruments writer, singer, songwriter, and he can play all these instruments at one time, he's also someone who understood the business of the music. And then at the same time was human enough to want to help other people to improve their lives. Like he was never, I shouldn't say never, but he always had the image and stayed with the image of being for the people, caring about humanity, and just really doing things that brought joy to people. And one of his quotes that he said was that a strong spirit transcends rules, and if you stay authentic and you persevere, you're going to leave a positive legacy. And that's what I believe Prince has done. And to me, that's what shows, and that's why I want to lift him up as being someone. It's my choice for being fully human today. Yeah,
beautiful. Yeah, he was magic not just with a guitar in his hand, but man. So my choice, I've already mentioned him at the top of the show, but former St. John's University basketball coach Lou Carnesecca died last weekend at the age of 99. He would have turned 100 in January. And they had they had a Catholic mass out at St. John's. A lot of players came back, guys that he had coached, people like Walter Berry, Chris Mullin, Mark Jackson, guys that played at St. John's and had great NBA careers. And then some others. The guys that came back range in age from their 40s, because he retired some years ago, to their 80s. So that's the scope of when he, how long he coached. And to a person, they just loved him. He was a funny guy, had big energy, but he always had time for people. And the best example, I mean, I can tell you, I spoke to him twice in my life, and I don't know him well, but one of the standard stories with him, even in his 90s, he'd be coming out of a restaurant or sitting in a restaurant in Queens, because he still lived not far from the university in Queens, in Jamaica, New York. And so, people all knew him, and they know what he looked like. He's a unique little guy. And they'd come up to him and say, Coach, he would just stop and talk. And then he would go back. He was with somebody who was driving for him, or one of the assistant ADs at the university, but somebody, because he wasn't driving anymore in his 90s. And then he'd talk to the person for 5 minutes and he'd get back in the car, and he would say to the people in the car, who the fuck was that guy? Like, he didn't know them, but he would just talk to them. First time I met him for the first time when I was a sophomore at St. John's, and I was in one of the public restrooms in the athletic building, which was called Alumni Hall. It's now called Conesucca Hall. And I was in there taking a leak, and somebody else walks in, and I look over, and it's him at the urinal. So we started talking to each other at the urinals. And he was like, he didn't know me. I was just a kid, 19 years old, 20 years old. So just a really good guy, great coach, but probably a greater human being, according to those who knew him best. So Lou Conesucca.
Excellent. Well, that's it, ladies and gentlemen. We reached the end of our show. Reggie, it's been a great opportunity to speak with you again, learn about Lou Conesucca. I've never heard of him, but I can, as you describe him, I'm imagining a person in my mind, and I can see them just being kind and having the energy that people want to connect with and resonate with and vibrate on frequency level, and that's just powerful. So thank you for that. Thank you for the wonderful show topic. Thank you for being present. As I said before, you always bring the right energy. You never come. And this is what I'm saying about being grateful. I can go to the show. You can just bring a lot of your world with you, and how you're seeing it right now. It can be negative. You can bring that energy on the show, and that can now be where we operate. And I'm grateful that you don't bring that. You're able to be a 10 regardless of that. And that's what's important. That's why that question is there. So thank you for being a 10 and being present. Listen, audience, thank you again for listening to another episode of Fully Human Connections. Until next Wednesday at 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. Let's all continue to work to strive to be more fully human. Thank you.